following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, and down by the lagoon, as Archie Bunker would have pronounced it. I am the most fortunate guy in the world. I get to talk to the most interesting people on the face of the planet. I have a guest today who's one of my favorite, not only one of my favorite humans, a guest, but one of my favorite humans. He's Gabriel Schechter, and he returns. I'm honored, Gabriel. Thank you.
Oh, I'm honored and pleased, Ralph. It's been too long since we've talked.
I know, and the last time we talked, we had an interview, the likes of which will be transcribed into a book that I am writing, a baseball book.
Oh, excellent.
It's called Mary Jane is My Mistress, and baseball is... Mary Jane is my girlfriend, and baseball is my mistress. And I talk about my experiences with the late, great Ferris Fain, who was the first human to bring marijuana and baseball together. And if you check it out... That's probably true, Ralph, not to interrupt. But when Babe Dahlgren was dumped from the Yankees in the early 40s, the rumors were that it was because of his involvement with marijuana. Ooh. That has been disputed by his grandson, but that might be something to look into. Is his grandson alive?
I corresponded with him 10 or 15 years ago, and he certainly was then.
Whoa, I would like to interview him because
I'm sure
you're telling me of something I didn't even know or remember, and that is his story will be included one way or the other. But Ferris and I were friends in Sacramento.
Oh, wow, cool.
He was a grower when his baseball career concluded. He was caught growing marijuana up in, I can't think of the town, but I will get it eventually, up
somewhere
in Northern
Mendocino.
California. And somewhere up there. And he and I, because I was such a big baseball nut living in Sacramento in those days, Sacramento was a hotbed of baseball, and they would have all sorts of youth programs and dinners and what have you, honoring players and bringing in players, all kinds of alumni stuff. And Ferris and I befriended each other before one of those events, and we got to chatting, and I was an imbiber at all times, but and we shared a joint, and we made a habit when he was coming into Sacramento, we'd sit around and talk. And one day I read the paper and he's busted, and it had the effect of making me a 420 advocate. The marijuana laws in California were antiquated. I can imagine what that meant for marijuana laws all over the country.
Right.
God
I
knows.
was back in Reefer Madness days, right?
Yeah, well, it seems like it. My mother was literally back in Reefer Madness days, and she was a person I'm thinking in the book that went to, in 1939, went to Yankee Stadium and saw the Lou Gehrig speech. I'm the luckiest man in the world. So I'm going to use that as a segue to talk about your book on the New York Yankees. And I put that Yankees, not Yankee, Yankees. Tell the audience why I'm making that clear. It's we talked off the air a bit. What are your allegiance to the Yankees, as it were?
Well, it's that part of it is a matter of language. One of my pet peeves is the use of the singular to describe the whole team. I've read manuscripts and books where Walter O'Malley is referred to as the Dodger owner. Well, he owned the whole team, right? He didn't just own Jackie Robinson. He was the owner of the Dodgers. The only time the singular is accurate is when you're referring to an individual member of the team.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I'm a Giant fan, so I can think of times when I'm a Giant fan. Well, which Giant?
Oh, it's traditional. I'm bucking the trend on this, but I wrote a blog about it once titled "Vin Scully is wrong and I'm right." So if I'm willing to challenge Vin Scully on Welcome to Dodger Baseball, then
yes.
I feel pretty strongly about it. So if you ask me, are you a Yankee fan? My answer will be yes. I like Giancarlo Stanton. Which one do you like? There have always been a couple of Yankees I've liked along the way. Moose Gowron was probably the first when I was a kid. But as for the Yankees, I have had a lifelong hatred for the franchise and the team as a whole. So that's the distinction I make. I am a Yankees hater.
Well, that kind of sums up my fandom, except that I'm a true Yankees worshiper. I hate them. When I was a kid, it was like rooting for U.S. Steel, that type of thing. But I certainly respect the team from the beginning of my following them when they had the 5 in a row consecutive world championships, and then into the late 50s with Mantle and what have you. And it's hard to not feel awe. And I was asked by my co-author to describe, I'm writing this as told to George Grimm. And I was asked by George to elaborate on my what it was like going to Yankee Stadium, and I started with the monuments and what have you. It's awe-inspiring. It's the house that Babe Ruth built, and all of those things and more. But you still don't have to root for the Yankees to win to appreciate it.
I'm with you in being awed by the presence of the old Yankee Stadium, and you can't help but be awed at the length of that dynasty that they put together. What they did on the field was amazing.
Sorry. Go ahead.
What they did on the field was amazing and impressive. In every other respect, the franchise has been nightmarish and cold-blooded. When Ralph Houck was manager in the 60s, they actually put him on television. They sent him on an interview show with Howard Cosell and a couple of other reporters, and they grilled Houck on why do the Yankees have an image of being so cold-blooded, and what do you think you can do about it? And Houck spent a half hour sweating under the lights, and the consensus afterwards was that he made them seem even more cold-blooded and heartless. And that is the true essence of the franchise, Ralph, and that's what my book details.
That's going to be a wonderful read for me. I cannot wait. I think let's talk about the coldest things the Yankees have ever done. For me, it was when they didn't tell Roger Maris that his wrist was broken, and they let him play, and it got worse. And then they traded him away without telling him or anyone else to St. Louis, and didn't include that knowledge when they traded him. Thought that was pretty cold.
Well, yeah. Well, absolutely. On the other hand, Maris was happy to get out of there. He had hated being in New York in the first place, and the Yankees had done almost nothing to protect him from the press in '61. The press was merciless. He got no rest. His hair fell out, and the Yankees just, let him hang there because everybody wanted Mickey Mantle to break Ruth's record, not Maris. And,
interesting. They don't portray the press that way in the book 61, the great documentary. I don't know if it was a book, but it was a documentary. And they make it seem like he was less cooperative with the press than the press was tyrannical towards him.
Oh, it was a two-way street, certainly. He was a small-town kid. He'd be from Minnesota North Dakota. He just felt he was a modest, shy guy, and he felt uncomfortable with the press to begin with. And then as the chase wore on, it became just more plentiful. So if you're uncomfortable in the first 5 minutes and you have to deal with it for an hour or two every day before and after the game, the mere fact of it wore him down.
Right. And the other thing about the Yankees as an organization that I disdained is what they did to Vic Power.
Yeah. I've got that in my book.
Talk a little bit about him. He was slick as a first baseman, and as a human being too.
Yeah, the Yankees took a lot of heat, especially from Jackie Robinson around 1952, for the fact that they hadn't brought up any Negroes to play on their major league team. The Yankees were the 13th out of 16 teams to integrate. And they had this kid, Vic Power, in the minor leagues, slick fielder. He could hit, he could run, just a fine ball player. And the Yankees buried him in the high minors for several years. George Weiss, the GM, made a wonderful statement late in 1953. They actually brought Power and Elston Howard up to the Yankees roster, as September call-ups. But even though they were something like 12 games ahead with 2 weeks to play, they never put either one in a game. Yet George Weiss was able to crow after the season that, we brought two of them up in September. What's the problem? And then they traded Vic Power as part of the shuttle system to the lowly Athletics. And Power blossomed with them and later with the Indians. He won 5 or 6 Gold Gloves. He was a terrific ball player.
In 1959,
but the Yankees tried to bury him.
Yeah, that purely on race. I just simply think that the ownership didn't want blacks in their ballpark. Pure and simple.
Pure and simple, yeah. And George Weiss didn't, and Casey Stengel didn't.
Yeah. I remember the quote when Casey Stengel finally got Elston Howard called up, and he made some remark because Elston Howard was slow, expected to be. He was a catcher, for Christ's sake.
Right.
But he made it, they called black players up. They finally got there, and I got the 8 ball that can't run, or some degrading comment.
Right. I wanted to put that in my book, but I could not find a definitive place where he where he said that. You know, I couldn't pin down just when and where and an answer to what he had said that. So regrettably, I left that quote out of the book. But it's dandy and worse than you recited it.
I'm right, exactly. The words don't make me vomit, to me. So I don't even use them to describe his quote. That's how despicable it was. But
yeah, Ralph, here's something else. As in 1961, when the Yankees went to spring training in St. Petersburg, the head of the local NAACP chapter spoke out, and he said, after all these years, we are taking a stand. We will not tolerate the practice of the Yankees staying at a hotel and their black players having to fend for themselves and find their own housing elsewhere in the city. We no longer condone this.
Wow.
And, there was a lot of pressure brought to bear on the Yankees. And finally, Dan Topping, I believe it was, one of the owners came out and said, we have no intention of trying to rewrite the laws of St. Petersburg, and sent the Yankees back to the same hotel, and Elson Howard was still out on his own as late as 1961.
Whoa, incredible. And you know who was sharing St. Petersburg for spring training at that time? And
I think it was the Cardinals.
It was indeed. And this story goes off the tangent a little bit, but it's related.
That's okay. That's some of the best stories, too.
All right. Bill White was one of the black players on the Cardinals, and there were a number of them. Gibson, and by that time,
right.
Brock, and the center field, the Flood, what happened.
Right.
And these were prominent players, and they were forced, because of the rules in St. Petersburg, to go across the tracks, they called it, and stay with with families in a boarding house type situation, and they enjoyed that. It wasn't that they didn't enjoy it, but it would stick in your craw if you couldn't stay where your teammates stay. And maybe
they made the best of it.
They made the best of it. Now, 30 years later, Bill White becomes the president of the National League.
Yes.
And the Giants are up for a move to St. Petersburg. And Bill White says, over my dead body. And he quelched that deal. And it was the deal, I think, when Piazza's father was trying to buy the team, and they were going to move. And
it was in the 80s, mid 80s.
Right, and that deal was quelched specifically because of those unfair treatments. And St. Petersburg had evolved, let's say, a little bit since then.
I like that story. I had not heard that. I like what he did.
Yeah, that's a
plus. Look
true
how it
story.
resulted for the Giants. I mean, they wouldn't have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dominoes fall in the strange direction. It took them a long time to get a ballpark. They were about to move 2 or 3 different times. One to Colorado. That was in the works for a while.
Right.
And once they got a ballpark, I will say this: it is a gem. It is.
Absolutely. I love that park.
Yeah.
Where else is the best view? Is the best view from way out in the upper deck in right field?
Where else? You say?
No other ballpark, right? Yeah, that is the best view for me.
And absolutely, it
overlooks the cove, and you can see the Bay Bridge, and And you can probably see your house from there, right?
In Alameda, right across the bay, down by the lagoon.
Yep. By the way, there's an excellent book about the Giants ballparks called Home Team by Rob Garrett. I don't know if you know it.
No, I don't.
But, you have to read it. I'll email you the details.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a fantastic book. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Let's talk more about your book. First of all, I want to know, because I'm an aspiring author, I've got a couple of chapters in, so I think of myself as the poor man's Peter Hemphill or whatever. How is it for you, being an author, writing a book on a daily basis? Do you write when the spirit hits you? Do you make an appointment with yourself to sit down for 2 or 3 hours? How do you do your craft?
That's a good question, and for any writer, not an easy answer. I generally am always writing in my head, and when something coalesces in my head to a certain point, I sit down and write it. The writing itself seems to take on its own momentum, and when it's going smoothly, I push it, and we'll, ride the what I think of as the momentum of clarity. That time when this is exactly what I want to say next, and how to say it. Ride that momentum as long as it goes, and if it's not there, don't force it. I finished writing this Yankees book, or finished the editing and final work on it a few weeks ago. And I have a very clear idea of the next book I want to write. I've been making notes on it. I've got gathering material for it, and I have sat down 4 or 5 times to start writing it, and I know exactly what that first chapter is going to be, but it's not there. And I know part of it is there's a postpartum lull after finishing a book. There is a little mental depression and weariness, and you need to gather a certain amount of energy to start the next one. And that's the stage I'm at now. I'm waiting for that moment to come where my focus is entirely on that writing.
Gotcha.
Real life can intrude.
Have you named your next project yet?
Yes, the next one, and let's not forget to talk about the current one. The next one is called A Baseball Childhood, and it is about how the dozens and dozens of different ways that I experienced baseball in my child formed the person I became, and gave me insights into the way my own brain worked and what my own world consisted of, chiefly, baseball stats at some point. That it was through my involvement with baseball that I became who I was, and it'll bounce between my childhood and echoes from later years. Things that happened at the Hall of Fame that echoed back to childhood. For instance, I'm a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan. My father was from Cincinnati, sort of a congenital defect. But when I was 10 years old was the year the Reds won the pennant in '61, and my father took me to 2 doubleheaders at Connie Mack Stadium that year to see the Reds and Phillies. And the first one, we sat right near home plate. A cop scalped us tickets after the first game had started. And I watched Jim O'Toole pitch a shutout. Just a beautiful game. O'Toole was sort of an earlier version of Jerry Koosman. Very stylish lefty with real good stuff. And 45 years later, I hosted O'Toole and his family, his wife and 6 of their 10 kids, for about an hour and a half at the Hall of Fame library, and he told me a wonderful story and a photo that I have about Roger Maris's 61st home run. O'Toole and his wife were right behind the plate. The Reds had clinched early and sent O'Toole and Joey J and their wives to New York to scout the Yankees. So there's a photo taken almost from where Sal Durante was when he caught the ball, looking back to the plate, Maris following through, and the O'Toole sitting right there in the front row. And I was able to retrieve and get them a copy of that photo. So this kind of circularity in my life. Yeah. Books, table games, dice games, street games, games against a house, baseball games in my bedroom, going to games, all the radio, all the dozens of ways a kid experiences baseball, and all of them took root and reverberated through my life. So that's what that book's going to be about.
Okay. How about when the magazines came out as a kid being a fan? Do you remember?
Sport Magazine was the one I read.
Right, and their pictures. I'm sure when you think of these players and you try to picture them, many of these players are pictured based on Ozzie Sweet's great photography and sport. And when I think of Warren Spahn, for instance, I think of his close-ups by Ozzie Sweet in that great magazine. They always have 6 or 7 color pictures that a kid could cut out, and take to down to the hotels as a kid and get autographs.
Did you do that?
I did that, and I still have an autograph. I must digress a little bit again and tell this story. This is the winner. It isn't a baseball story. It's a basketball story. The Boston Celtics are in to play the Knicks, and they'd stay. There were 2 or 3 hotels in and around the Garden where visiting players would stay.
This is the old Garden.
The old Garden on 49th Street. And I'm a kid, and I've got all kinds of, the Celtics are in, and I've got some pictures, and I know I'll never get another Russell. I'll never get a Russell because he didn't sign autographs.
Right.
But strangely, I fell into step with him from the hotel to the Garden. He's walking with Wayne Embry.
Okay, oh man, one of my Cincinnati Royals. I was a big Royals fan,
a Cincinnati guy, and he was a stud at that. I mean, based on Claude Novello, those guys, he played good basketball. At the end of his career, as Red Auerbach would tend to do, he was one of the veterans that sat on the bench. Carl Braun did it. Number of guys that he'd have. Nelson over the.
I would describe Wayne Embry as sort of a bigger version of Wes Unseld.
Yes. Not as good as Wes Unseld.
Right, not the scorer, but a tough body to get around on defense.
Absolutely, and those 2 centers are trudging down New York streets, and I fall in step. And I'm a kid, like 14, and I heard a rumor once that at that time that Bill Russell, because of his pregame nerves, would throw up, literally regurgitate before ball games because he was nervous. And I go up to him and I said, Mr. Russell, you're playing the Knicks and Charlie Tyree tonight. You don't have to you don't have to be nervous. You can take a minute. And he cackles. You could take a minute.
Yeah.
You don't have to throw up for this one. I'm a smart ass kid, right? And is that a shot? It really shouldn't be. But he cackles that Bill Russell laugh. And I said, would you sign this? And his reputation was that he wasn't signing autographs for Sat Sanders, his teammate, who wanted an autograph for someone. And he picks up the paper or the picture, and the picture of Bill Russell is with his elbow in the face of Dolph Schayes. That's
nice.
The sport picture. And I said,
nice.
I made some remark about I'm a Jew boy or something that he laughed at again, because he literally was towering over Schayes.
Right.
And he just shakes his head, and he's about to sign, and I go, to Ralph, best wishes? Is that balls or what? So
chutzpah,
chutzpah. I do not have many of those old autographs. I have a bunch, but not all of them.
Did he sign?
He signed it to Ralph. He didn't sign best wishes to Ralph. He signed Bill Russell, and I had a woman friend years later decoupage it on a plaque, negating its worth totally, I'm sure, but its worth to me it's never going to be sold. It's not
That's
something.
Great. I met him in 2002 and got to shake his hand and have my photo taken with him, but that was certainly it was a no autographs day. It was thrilling just to meet him and shake his hand.
That absolutely, and I'd rather have the picture with the player. I've got a few of those in my collection than the autograph, because the autograph is somebody's scribble. And as a matter of fact, as a baseball card collector, the autograph, no matter who it is, unless it's a real superstar on a baseball card, negates the price of the baseball card. The baseball card goes down because of the autograph in certain instances. So, but it's the personal, it's just the eye contact that you remember it as a fan, as a kid. But I can't think of anything I can segue into back into baseball with that.
Ralph, I've got a suggestion.
Yes.
Which is that we stop this one and do a whole separate one on my current book, since otherwise people will have to go more than a half hour before they get to it. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll set a time right now. How about a week from today?
Sure.
Same time, same place.
Sure.
Okay.
Because otherwise we're going to go on for quite a while.
All right. Well, end it by telling me, and I've talked to you about. I know you're a Reds fan, and I've kind of
and a Mets fan.
Just and a Mets fan. Tell me about Fred Hutchinson. I've kind of talking to you, the Bear, and he was a big part of the Cincinnati Red history. Tell me something we don't know about him. He died early.
He died young of cancer. He was actually, I was 10 or 11 when he contracted cancer, and he's the first famous person I remember being identified in the newspapers as having the disease. Sometimes they mentioned it in the obituary. He had cancer, but first public, cancer battle I remember. His brother was a famous physician in Seattle, where they were from, and the Fred Hutchinson Cancer clinic. I don't know the name of it, but there's been a major cancer institution in Seattle named after him for decades. And so that legacy carries on. I don't know if you knew that.
Didn't. I remember it now, but it wasn't something that stood out in my mind.
He was known as the Bear. He was a very fine pitcher, mainly for the Tigers during the 1940s, and a very hard-nosed, gruff competitor, kind of a bear-like physique and very imposing and kind of grim, and was nicknamed the Bear. But like I'll think of another example of it, I'm sure. Like a few later managers, he had that kind of protective, nurturing aspect to his character that his players knew about, and that's what spurred them on to greatness and to their dedication to him as he continued to manage and fight the battle as long as he could.
Yeah. Sad. I think he was 49 or something like that when he passed
I think
away.
so, yeah.
Much too young.
Oh, yeah.
Give me a tease on your book for next week.
Yes, the book is titled Spanking the Yankees, 366 Days of Bronx Bummers. And it has a lot of stuff from games where they stank. It has an account of every postseason game they lost and every series they lost in the postseason. There are 27 of those, a perfect number. And then probably the longest of my favorite section is on the off season. Lots of stuff about awful trades and some of the clunker free agents and fights and bad behavior and all the nasty things that Jacob Rupert and George Weiss did to the players and salary disputes. All kinds of neat stuff.
Did you make mention of the Copacabana?
Oh, my goodness, yes. I call it a smorgasbord of schadenfreude.
Okay, I like that.
A celebration of everything bad that's happened to them and everything heinous that they've perpetrated on the baseball world. There you go.
There you go.
Available on Amazon and from Summer Game Books. Thank you.
Who threw the punch, my friend? Was it Roger?
Well, recently in the last year or two, a security guard from the Copa spoke up and said he threw the punch. Said he was off that night, but they smelled trouble and called him in, and he was, like an undercover enforcer. And when the whole troop marched into the restroom, he got there first and unloaded on the guy. Hank Bauer has historically been named as the guy, and Billy Martin was blamed for it and traded as a result. So this guy might be telling the truth, he might not. Who knows? It was, he's come forward 60 years later.
Wow.
But it's an intriguing story anyway.
And I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you, Mr. Schechter.
Thank you, Ralph. Be well.
Hall of Fame. Before we go, real quick.
Yes.
Your Hall of Fame. Talk about that. What you did.
Oh,
when you escorted the O'Tooles, it wasn't just some guy off the street escorting the O'Tooles.
Right.
You worked for the Hall of Fame.
I did. From 2002 to 2010, I was a researcher in the library, in the Giamatti Research Center, and did all kinds of things. And one of them was meet a lot of ex-players, descendants of Hall of Famers. I met, grandchildren of George Sisler and Lefty Grove and Al Simmons and, a bunch of those people. Three Finger Brown.
Truly a guy who lives a Walter Mitty life. Am I correct?
Well, that's true. You.
Like me. You got to know one to recognize it in someone else. So, love you, Gabe. It's great talking to you. We'll talk next week.
It was, Ralph. Again, yes. Be well.
Be well.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.